Hey guys, what's up? It's the Merc here from Poolshed Games, and it is time. It's Valentine's Day weekend, which is a weekend about love, romance, and sometimes about breakups and failed love. So I've decided what better time to talk about my GW experience. And I feel like this is a video that I need to do, because we're a wargaming channel. We're about the hobby, we're about the game, and GW, whether you like to admit it or not, Games Workshop is a huge part of the tabletop hobby. And maybe they're not as huge as they were a few years ago or back in the 90s, but they're still a huge part of this hobby. And I feel like for a channel like mine, that's been going for roughly 3 years, at some point we need to tackle that elephant in the room. And I've decided tonight is the night I'm going to do it. Now, if you're a GW fan, I hope you'll watch this video. It's not going to be entirely positive, but I'm not going to try to shit all over Games Workshop either. I don't think that that's appropriate. Because I'm going to come out and say it right at the beginning of this video. I have Games Workshop and Warhammer Fantasy and 40k to thank for getting me into this hobby. Not only for getting me into this hobby, but for a lot of good times with a lot of good people. It's what brought the Lich Lord into this hobby. He came into it with me after I got into Warhammer Fantasy. My dad got into the hobby because of Warhammer Fantasy and 40k. It's how I met a family friend who I refer to as my uncle now. He played Warhammer and 40k, Fantasy and 40k. So the entire gaming group I have now, and a lot of good memories, come from my time playing Games Workshop games. So as you watch this video, if at times I get negative, or at times I criticize or bash things that Games Workshop have done, remember that I don't hate the company of the games. So with that out of the way, I guess a little background of where I come from with Games Workshop. If it wasn't for Games Workshop, I probably wouldn't have gotten into the tabletop gaming hobby. It was probably when I was 10 or 11 years old. I might have been 12. I don't remember entirely. My parents and we went to Ohio. And there was a little gaming hobby card shop out there called Spellbinders that just for some reason I asked if we could go into. We went into it, and man, I was playing Magic the Gathering at the time. But I walked in, and there was just all these boxes. This is around the time that 2nd edition had turned into 3rd edition 40k. And there were just Space Marine boxes and just, a lot of Games Workshop product, and it really caught my eye. Because I had been into the modeling beforehand. I had put together military models, like PT-109, a B-25 bomber, things like that. But I always wanted something that I could do with my models. And I found this stuff. And the first model I ever bought was a Space Marine attack bike. Didn't know what its rules were. I didn't know what the game was, but it just looked so cool. These big power armored guys on this bike that had a sidecar with a big machine gun on it. I was all over that. So that was my experience, my first experience with Games Workshop products. And I put that together, and I got a couple of other models, and it was funny because the first game I ever played was 5th edition Warhammer Fantasy. I don't remember a lot of that, and I remember I played Dark Elves. A guy at the shop let me use his Dark Elves against his Chaos, and it was a good game. Then I got into 40k. That was my first tabletop army, and the first army I did was Blood Angels. And I guess I did Blood Angels because A, they were Space Marines, They were big, they were bad, they were cool, but also because I kind of liked their fluff, their background of being the warrior aesthetic, like artist poets with the dark flaw secret. So I got into that. And the group I played with for a long time, they stuck with 2nd edition because they hated 3rd, and I played a lot of 2nd. I know a lot of people out there say that 2nd was a great game. 2nd was fun, but there was a lot of bullshit in 2nd. The fact that Space Marines might have well have just had a 4-up save against pretty much everything was kind of annoying. But that was what got me into it. And I had a pretty good-sized Blood Angels army there for a while. And then when I got it, 6th edition Fantasy, the starter set with the Empire and the Orcs. That was my first foray into Fantasy. I built an Empire army. My buddy at the time, the Lich Lord, he ended up with the Orcs out of that set, built himself an Orc army. My dad did Dogs of War back when Dogs of War were a thing. And, man, we just remember playing on the kitchen table against the Lich Lord, his Orcs versus my Empire. Just a lot of good times. A lot of fun. And this was back in the 90s. I think 95, I think, is when 6th edition came out. Maybe a little bit after that. But, yeah. And, I mean, all through high school I played Warhammer Fantasy. And it came to the point where I would be playing... I preferred to play Warhammer over, like, Magic the Gathering. And to me, back then, Warhammer was more affordable than Magic the Gathering. Because back in 6th edition and, like, 3rd, 4th edition 40k, Games Workshop hadn't become the greedy entity that it is today. At least in my eyes. You could get a box set that would give you a whole unit, and it wouldn't cost you an arm and a leg. Like, I remember the old Catachin box. You got 20 Catachins for, I think, $20 or $24. It was the same with Orcs. You got a whole box of Orcs for $20 or $24. Berserkers, you get the 10-man tack squad. I think that's it. In Fantasy, I don't remember exactly, but I know, like, when the Empire Knights box came out, I believe it made 8 Knights, which was a wonky number, but it was nice because, you know, you could get a box, and you could make a unit of 8 Knights, or you could make a couple characters with it, and it was just, you know, it was good things. It was also back in the day when they did the army sets. Like, this is when the battle for Armageddon, that big campaign happened, and they did, like, the $250 army boxes that had a full 1,500 to 2,000 point army in it. And, man, they were just great armies. Great armies. And I stuck with Warhammer Fantasy right up until 8th edition came out. 40k, we played right up into 6th. I think it's 7th edition now. Man, I don't even know. I think it's 7th edition. We played right up into 6th. You know, we were a group that we played, we kind of mixed and matched editions, I guess, and made the game the way we wanted it to be. And we had a lot of fun with it. But towards the end of my time playing Games Workshop games, it's probably about 5 years ago now, maybe even 10. I'd say 10, around 2005. I just started to get bored with it. I had been introduced to War Machine and Hordes. I wasn't super thrilled. This was like, I remember Mark 1 War Machine, and it was just like, I don't know what's going on here. I don't want to play this. Funnily enough, one of the companies that kind of broke me away from Games Workshop was Spartan Games. They released Uncharted Seas, and man, I was all over that. Another game company that had a hand and kind of shaking me away from Games Workshop was Mongoose Publishing. They fucked it up hardcore, but they had a hand in it. They made Starship Troopers, which was Andy Chambers was part of that. He had worked for Games Workshop. And I was all on board with that game. For like the first year when it came out, I was all about Starship Troopers, because I love Starship Troopers, the universe, the fluff, the lore, the book. And then like a year in, they dropped the ball and the game disappeared. And I was left. I mean, I still played 40K in Fantasy. But it got to the point, especially into late 7th edition Fantasy and late 5th edition 40K, got to the point where prices were a little extravagant to me, and I got bored with it. I think part of the problem is I found now that I much prefer 10 to 15 millimeter games because they feel more like a battle. I mean, unless I'm playing a skirmish game, like Infinity at 28 millimeter is fine. But to me, and I've told this to the Lich Lord and I've told this to my buddy Dom, when you play 40K at the 28 millimeter scale, at the points that the game is kind of meant to operate at, it just feels so cluttered. I mean, you end up with like parking lots of tanks and just wall-to-wall infantry, and it just, I don't know, it just doesn't do it for me anymore. And I'm not saying that it's a bad game, just not my game anymore. I still like to go to mini wargaming, and I still like to watch their battle reports. I think the flea-ridden scrap whatever, the Sergeant Slaughter's Chaos battle report right now, the narrative campaign, is one of the best I've watched. It makes me laugh every time I watch it. So Dave's doing a great job with that. But when you take away the narrative, and you take away the fun that guys like Dave and Steve and Ash and the Lonely Havocs bring to the table when they're playing the game itself to me is just a bore. It's just rolling dice for the sake of rolling dice. And I know people are going to disagree with me on that, but that's what 40K feels like to me anymore. It's just like, alright, my unit goes, and it rolls all these dice. Your unit is either dead or still around. And I think that's part of the problem with the my whole army goes and your whole army goes system. I've come to find out that I really enjoy alternating activations, because you don't ever have that feeling of, oh god, my army's gone. We had that a lot when we played Apocalypse. You would have guys that would bring Titans to the table, and if their side went first, your whole army was just like, meh, gone. One game we played, I played my Grey Knights back when it was Codex Demon Hunters, and the Lich Lord had his Imperial Guard. We were against 3 guys. It was Chaos, and I couldn't bring my Grey Knight Terminator formation on for like 4 turns, because if I would have, they just all died. So that was part of my problem with the game. It just stopped feeling interactive, I guess. And I guess I'll talk about fantasy. And I hate to talk about fantasy because I know a lot of people in the community love the current edition. A lot of people love 8th edition fantasy. And 8th edition fantasy for me was the edition that killed the game. And I know people are going to say, oh, you were a competitive player. Oh, you were a win-at-all-cost player. Not really. Granted, the armies I played would probably say differently. I mean, I played dwarves, which they weren't really a win-at-all-costs army. They were kind of you're going to get spanked army. And I had dark elves and high elves. And high elves were one of those books that in the late 7th edition were kind of broken because they always struck first. And dark elves could be. I hated the pendant. I hated the reverse invulnerable save pendant. I thought it was dumb. But that was me. But the things I liked about 7th and 6th edition, I liked the fixed charges. I liked that you had to be good at estimating where you were and how far away, and you knew the distances between you and your opponent. I liked guess range artillery. I liked that random element in there, and I liked the magic system. I also liked that combat psychology mattered. And I know a lot of people will disagree, and that's fine. But let me explain my reasoning. To me, the movement phase always felt like a game of chess. Even with my dwarves, who never got to charge, I was always thinking about my positioning. I was always thinking, do I do denied flank? How do I stagger these units? How do I set up my counter charges? And, everybody says if you got charged, you lost in 6th and 7th edition. It wasn't true. You could build your units to have the static combat resolution and to stand up to the charge. I did it all the time with my dwarves. So I liked that. I liked that you had to think like 2-3 turns ahead as to where your units were going to be, where your opponent's units were going to be. I can't stand random charge distances. I can't stand the fact that you can charge, I think it's your base charge plus 2d6. So for a dwarf, you can charge, 8 inches? It's so out there. And I will say this, yes, I only played 3 games of 8th edition. And I was just like, no, I'm done. And it's not entirely 8th edition's fault. I was already falling out of love with Games Workshop's games at the time. It was kind of the nail in the coffin. So that's that. I liked guess range artillery. I liked that you didn't have these laser-guided precision mortars and cannons and stone throwers. Because here's what happened in the last game of the 8th edition that I played. I played a big army of Dark Elves. And I went against my dad's ogres and my buddy Dom's Empire. And there's nothing like watching an Empire mortar just lay the template where it wants to and roll to see if it scatters. So if he wants to lay it over your entire spearman unit, yep, he can. He just has to roll to see if it scatters off, and it usually won't scatter that far. So that was my problem with getting rid of the guess range. Also, watching Old World Wars over mini wargaming, they do this thing where it's like, I'm going to put it 6 inches away from the unit or whatever, and then roll to see, and that's with cannons. And that just seems so weird to me. Artillery became too accurate. At least to me, it did. And I know a lot of people will say, oh, well, guess range was only there to make it more finicky, and it just was there for the guys that could guess ranges good. I guess you can look at it that way, but it added an element of random skill to the game. It wasn't that hard to kind of figure out how far 12 inches was. You just had to put a little work into it. So that's my gripe with that. The magic system. I loved magic in 6th and 7th edition. Made playing my dwarves hard because I didn't get magic. I had guns though, so it was okay. But my high elves, my dark elves, my high elf army was themed around the Tower of Hoeth with mages and their swordmaster bodyguards. And my dark elves were themed around the sorceresses and Cainite units. And I liked magic. I mean, in 7th and 6th edition, to me, it was if you paid for it, you got what you paid for. You knew you were bringing a certain amount of dice to the table, and you knew you were going to be able to use that amount of dice. Whereas with 8th edition, it's random dice for magic, and it's just everything's so random. You could have a turn where you get 2 magic dice. And I'm sorry, but if I'm bringing an army and I've paid 400 or 500 points for my magic users, I should get the same out of it that somebody that brings an army and paid 400 or 500 points for their artillery. I shouldn't be hamstrung by a random magic system. So there was that. Also, I didn't like the fact that Irresistible Force was also miscast. I liked 6th and 7th, where if you miscast, it was a miscast. If you Irresistible Force, it was Irresistible Force. There was no crossover between the two. The last thing I will say about the game, the last game of 8th edition I played, it was boring. I was bored. I was playing Dark Elves, and because charging didn't make you go first in hand-to-hand anymore, you went by initiative order, I didn't care. To me, there was literally no reason to care about where my unit was. Because I went first. I had higher initiative, so I got to strike first. And I could usually mitigate the amount of damage that came to me from the units that were attacking me. It's just the way it was, and to me it was boring. It got rid of that element of chess-like maneuvering. So that was what killed fantasy for me. And that's just my personal opinion. If you like 8th edition fantasy, that's fine. 40k was a little bit different. Blitzlord and I actually, about a month or two ago, well, maybe 3 or 4 months ago, looked into getting back into 40k. And I couldn't do it. I got what was the current Necron Codex at the time, not the hardback, but the old paperback. And I wrote up an army that I liked. And I went on to the website, GW's website, and I started pricing it out. And I think for 1,000 points, it was 200 and some, or almost $300. And I was just like, I can't do this. I'm not paying that much. No. Maybe I'm spoiled. Maybe I'm just not willing to pay that much, but I'm not. My problem is, I can pay $65 and get a full playable army for Spartan or Infinity. I can pay $40 and get a full 200-point army that's good to go right out of the box. And Immortals. I wanted to do an Immortal-themed Necron army. You only buy them in a box of 5. They don't come in a box of 10. They don't come in a full unit. You have to buy 2 boxes. And Tomb Scythes, Tomb Blades, the cool Necron jet bikes. I wanted a unit of those. To get a full unit, you had to buy 2 boxes, and that was going to give you an extra. Why? I don't understand. Also, there were other little decisions that GW made that I couldn't support. I didn't like or understand the switch to hardback army books, mostly because they're more expensive, and I didn't think they added anything. I didn't think they were any better than the paperbacks. Also now, everything you need isn't in your codex. I mean, yeah, the basic army's in there, but there's all kinds of formations and data slates that you have to buy ebook versions of. I don't want to do that. I think it's dumb. Either give me everything I need to play in the $50 codex you're asking me to buy, or provide that extra stuff for free. A lot of other companies do it. Corvus Belli that makes Infinity does it. Privateer Press puts all their FNQs for free. Spartan Games makes all their army lists, and they're making the rulebooks free. So, it's all the little things. And, like I said, I had a lot of good times playing 40k in fantasy. I mean, Flitzlord and I, when we played my dwarves versus his Chaos army, there was just this grudge that went on with his Chaos Lord trying desperately to kill my Dwarf Lord. We had a lot of good times with it. And, I mean, I'm going to be the guy, I'm going to say this. With the rumors of 9th edition, where they might just be scrapping the entire game as it is and creating a new one, I'm kind of curious to see how it plays out, because, I mean, I would consider looking into it, because it will change the game. It will, hopefully, make it a little bit more affordable. Not only that, but hopefully it'll make it less about the giant brick units and more about having multiple units in your army again. 40k, I don't know. I don't know what could get me back into 40k. Making the models affordable, that would be one thing. And I guess maybe they're going back to softcover army books. That'd be another thing. I'd really appreciate that. I think it'd be great. But GW was kind of like my first love when it came to the tabletop hobby. And you either stay with your first love forever, or you kind of drift apart and you go separate ways. And for me and Games Workshop, we've kind of drifted apart, and I've gone a separate way, and I've found other gaming companies that I enjoy more. And I think in this day and age, with companies like Corvus Belli and Privateer Press and Spartan Games and Weird Miniatures and Manic, people aren't as constricted in their choice of what game they play anymore. And Games Workshop's either going to have to wrap their heads around that or deal with the consequences. And I guess to round out the video, back in the day, Games Workshop had the best models you could buy. They had, hands down, I would say, the best models. And people will tell you today that they still have the best models. And I have to respectfully disagree. I think that Corvus Belli, the guys that do Infinity, their models are just beautiful. They're dynamic. They're meaty when they're supposed to be. They're lithe and agile when they're supposed to be. And the resculpts they're doing now with the new edition of the game, the models are just mind-blowing. Spartan Games, for the models they make, for the scale they're in, they're fantastic. They're packed full of detail. They're fun to paint. They're easy to put together. Even War Machine and Hordes, yeah, it's a different aesthetic, but I think the models are just fantastic. And I mean, it all comes down to aesthetic. It all comes down to what you prefer. So I guess there you have it. It's not that we don't cover Games Workshop games because we hate them or we're vehemently opposed. It's that I don't cover Games Workshop games because I fell out of love with Games Workshop. Games Workshop kind of just let me go. And I found other companies. I found other companies that scratch the itch for games that I want more, and they scratch it better. And I'm not saying I would never go back to Games Workshop. Hell, I've thought about picking up the new Blood Angels and Grey Knights codexes just to have them. And when 9th edition Fantasy comes out, I might check it out just to see what it is and to see if it brings the interest I had in the hobby back. But for right now, I have Spartan Games. I have Corvus Belli and Infinity. I have Privateer Press. I've moved on. And it seems like there are portions of the community, the hobby community, that are moving on from Games Workshop. And there's still the guys that really like it and really enjoy it. And I don't think either side's right. Like I said, this is a hobby. It's an expensive niche hobby that we spend our money on. And when it comes down to it, you're going to spend your money on what you like. And if you like Games Workshop, that's what you're going to spend your money on. And there's nothing wrong with that. Because it's your money and you can spend it how you want. And guys like me, we can sit here and we can tell you our opinion on it. And maybe that opinion will influence how you spend your money. But it's your money in the long run. And like I said, you got to buy and play what makes you happy. And for a long time, Games Workshop was what made me happy. I bought it and I played it. But now, I found other companies that make me happy and are more fun to play on my tabletop. And they're the ones that get my money. So that's it. That's the elephant in the room has been tackled and ridden out of the room, hopefully. Hopefully you guys liked the video. Hopefully it wasn't too negative. I didn't want it to be too negative. But I wanted to get this out of the way. And I wanted to explain my thoughts and feelings on it. If you guys have a comment, if you agree, if you have a similar story with Games Workshop, or if you're still in love with Games Workshop, let me know why down in the comments below. Give us a like if you like the video, subscribe, share it with your friends, it always helps, and we'll see you next time here at Bullshit Games.